Welcome to the Jack Westin MCAT podcast with your host, Molly
and Azaii Calderon-Muñiz. Welcome to another episode. Super excited to have you here again, Molly. Personally, super excited. Professionally, super excited. And I think we're going to let students know we're going to be talking about what you have probably already guessed after many episodes is my favorite topic on the MCAT. Not sure how you'd feel about it, Molly.
I gotta say, you know what? I would probably rank it my second favorite. I've got my nerdy dopamine and serotonin earrings on in. I love me some biochem. It makes me jump out of bed in the morning. But I have a soft spot in my heart for our topic today, which is
cars.
Oh my God, look at us. We even synchronized. That was unintentional, everyone, but we're both just on the same wavelength. I am super excited to be here and super excited to chat about cars, which is a super fun and often a little scary aspect of the MCAT.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I was not a fan of it when I was studying for the MCAT, which is ironic given that I was a romance language and literature major. But now I see something different in it, and it's one of those things where students come to us all the time and you ask them, what's one word that you would use to describe how you feel about cars? Actually, for people that are listening, what's one word that you would use to describe how you feel about cars? And, we get so many different terms. We get things like it's bad, it's scary, it's frustrating. Why does it have to be on the end of the MCAT? I'm like, that's not a word.
Useless. Yeah.
Yeah, useless, right? Subjective is one that comes up all of the time. People just don't like cars, which is actually kind of sad now that I'm on the other side of things, because it really has a lot of value. But at the same time, it's completely understandable why it's such a terrifying section and why students, come into it and they come to us and they find us because they're struggling on this section. And I know that's what we want to talk about today, to make cars a little less scary, a little less subjective, and a lot more doable, because that really is our goal here at Jack Westin and our personal goal as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, I'm curious, do you remember your first cars passage that you ever did while prepping for your MCAT?
No, and that's probably for the better.
You blocked it out. Yeah, I remember the first time, basically my first exposure to the MCAT. I'm like, okay, I'm kind of debating about pre-med. My pre-med path is a little weird, a little unusual. I didn't really start looking into this until I was like, halfway through college. I was like, you know what? Maybe I'm interested in med. I'm just going to do a practice exam. I'm going to do the sample test. I logged on, right? Chem phys, pretty much what I expected, right? Like, okay, yeah, we got to know chemistry and physics. I had no idea what cars was. I opened it up and I was like, the first passage I think they're all not related to MCAT relevant content. And I just remember looking at this and saying, what? Am I supposed to know about this early Renaissance painter?
Exactly.
Like, am I supposed to know about this archaeological phenomenon that's being discussed, or am I missing something? And that to me is kind of the hallmark of cars. People are sitting here looking at this and saying, am I missing something? Like, is there some little secret that I'm supposed to know about cars? Because this looks really weird to me, which is how these feelings of subjectivity and frustration come about, I think.
Yeah, it's one of those, wait, what just happened moments, especially if you don't know. Right. So sometimes students know that they have to do the cars section. And so they'll go and they'll do a practice passage like what happened to you. And it's just something didn't click. What just happened? Right. And it's weird because it's also one of those things where everyone seems to have an opinion, right? Cars brings out those really intense feelings in people. I have yet to meet someone who's like, yeah, just cars, neutral. I could go either way. I have personally yet to meet someone who feels that way. And it's, other students have opinions, instructors have opinions, different prep companies have different opinions. The authors all have different opinions. And so it feels natural for us to have our own opinion and for the strength of that opinion, that emotional charge to be present and to be valid. And I want to say that our feelings about cars are valid. And, right, rather than or but. And we can learn to adjust them in a way that's productive, because coming into a section, I see this with students all the time. You come into a section nervous, stressed, feeling like you're going to do poorly. And what happens? You get stressed, right? Your sympathetic nervous system activated through the roof. I like to say that students start panic reading. And so it's the kind of that intensity. And then instead of being careful, you just kind of go at it 110 miles an hour and then nothing sticks. Then you freak out. You start panicking some more, go back, realize that you didn't get it. You're still stressed and you're still reading faster than you should be. And then it's just this giant spiral. And it's so easy to get lost in the madness. And so kind of learning to take a step back and realizing this isn't like what I've seen before. This isn't like college, like undergrad, right? It's a different ball game. And that means the way I approach it needs to be different, is something that the earlier we can understand and the earlier we can cement that and learn to approach it correctly, the more likely we are to succeed and not have all of those negative emotions attached to it, which will make it easier to do well on test day, right? Because the last thing you want is feeling like there are so many unknown variables on test day that, you kind of start getting stressed, enter that panic mode early, and then, you don't want that. And so that's something that we really care about here, making sure that we interrupt that cycle.
I love for those of you guys who are watching, you can see it. For those of you guys who are listening, you can hear it. I love the passion you feel about cars, Azaii. It's such a pleasure to be here chatting with you about this, because it is so important. And I love that you're touching on this, like not even just mental component of cars, but the emotional component of cars, right? I think the fact that it's so unique and so different, and the fact that there's not a ton of guidance that we get as far as cars, it introduces this fear and this panic as soon as you start, right? And the way that you panic read is probably pretty different from the way that you practice, right? So even if you start to develop better skills when you're doing untimed practice, for example, or you just do one passage, right? The different emotions that come up when you do a practice exam, right? Even if you're getting better outside of an exam, something that we see is sometimes that, your score on exams never improves because you get panicked, and then you start to read things differently, right? And ultimately, right, your mindset shifts, right? Your emotional state shifts. The way that you read things is different. And I love thinking about this, because ultimately, our mindset shouldn't be the make all, break all of cars, right? Our emotional state, right? It is so important, but the weirdest thing to accept about cars is your emotions, your feelings, your opinions actually shouldn't influence your ability to read and answer questions, right? Basically what we need to do, and this actually can be helpful just for test anxiety in general, is go in and sit down and say, all right, I'm a blank slate now, right? I've gotten rid of all my emotions, all my feelings, all my opinions, right? I am a completely neutral third party, right? Okay, you're going to teach me about archaeology. All right, pull up a chair, sit down. All right, author, tell me what you care about, right? Tell me something that matters to you. Maybe I hate archaeology or philosophy, which I kind of do. I love it now because of cars, but I kind of do, right? Everyone's got that subject. I'm not a philosopher, but Molly doesn't exist when I sit down to do cars anymore, right? Tell me what you care about, author. And they're basically, right, you're going to have someone just teach you something they care about and teach you things that matter to them. And leaving your emotions and opinions at the door is a really crucial part of learning to engage with cars. So, take some of that pressure off yourself, right? Your job is not to be the person guiding this discussion, right? Your job is to listen, right? Sit there and absorb what the author is telling you, right? And it's nice because the way that we read cars when we're doing one passage should be the same as when we've got 20 back to back, for that exact reason.
Yeah. And this is where I always tell students all the time, you can be the world's leading expert on Dante. If you get a passage on Dante, guess what? You don't know a thing. You have to throw all of that in your back pocket, leave it at the door. And, You can be a very opinionated person. I'm someone that has very strong, feelings and opinions. And when I get into something, you can probably tell there's a lot there. But when we start reading cars, we have to learn that it's not even just not being an expert. It's not our opinion. Our opinion does not matter. What people don't realize is that even on the AMC's website, it tells you that you don't need outside, right? You don't need that background information. And so learning to let go is also really difficult, because as pre-meds, we've been taught that, we need to know this and we have to be really comfortable with this and we have to have control over this and we have to plan this. And there's so much that goes into it. So learning to let go and give up that control is intimidating, but it's only when you learn that it's not about you and that it's not your opinion, there's no expectation of you knowing that material ahead of time, that you can really succeed. And I have students tell me, I know this topic. Why am I doing worse? Because you're not letting go, and you're holding on to that. And I think that really takes us also to understanding why the AMC and the MCAT would even want us to let go. Because isn't this exam supposed to be about us? Isn't this exam supposed to be about understanding you as an applicant, right? Or at least how you think as an applicant. And the AMC is they're clever, because this is such a different section. Right? For the sciences, most of it is strategy. There is content though. So you have to have the content foundation in order to apply, right, the information and use that critical reasoning. But you have that to fall back on. You have that content. Cars is no content required, right? Has no content to it. So it's all strategy. It's all skill, which means that you have to develop that skill, those strategies, and that gives them a very different view of how you think than the science sections. And that's the power of cars, honestly.
Yeah, I love it. And I love that you bring up the comparison between science and cars, because, in the science sections and all throughout undergrad, right, your job is to take what you know and apply it to this new thing. Right? Every science passage, right? You talk about, okay, yeah, there's content, but most of it is strategy, right? The strategy there is use what's in your brain that you learned in preparation for this exam. Look at this new scenario and think, what are the connections between what I know and what I'm reading? Cars, all that goes out the door, right? Like you said, even if you are the leading expert on Dante or on, whatever weird philosophical rambling we're going to get into, or Picasso, right? It actually, that information that you have, right? Our instinct is, hey, let me use that to understand what's going on. That can actually hurt you, right? Because what if you have some very strong opinions about Picasso, right? Maybe you love Picasso's artwork, right? It's your favorite painter, right? You've got prints all over your apartment. Maybe you're reading a passage where the author has a very negative tone about Picasso, right? And you're thinking like, Picasso's the best. You're like trying to fight with the author, right? You get to the questions and they're asking you, how would the author feel about this? You're thinking about yourself and your own perspective. You're going to pick, they love Picasso because that's what you feel, right? And it's the kind of the instinct we get as scientists, right? To apply outside knowledge. Here we want to divorce from that, right? And I love that you also are thinking, why? Why is this a skill that the AMC wants to test us on, right? And to me, right, this is preparing you to ultimately be a fantastic listener, right? That's, to me, if you ask me what's the purpose of cars on the MCAT, it's to teach you how to listen, right? Because you may have a patient that comes in, Azaii, I'm sure you've got plenty of stories, right? That has a totally different perspective from you, right? Lived an entirely different life, has an entirely different set of opinions, thoughts, feelings, experiences, right? And you need to be able to separate yourself, your emotions, your, experiences, all those things, to really hear what this patient has to say, right? Because if you take your brain and apply all the things that you know and have experienced to this person, you might miss something crucial, right? And you may not be able to fully engage and interact with them and treat them with the humanity that every patient in this world deserves, right? So to me, why is cars a section on the MCAT? It's to prepare you to help and really see your patients, right? Which is crucial in a field that's so, I want to say social. It's not really social, but, it kind of is, right? As medicine.
Oh, 110%. It's weird because I think also students don't realize the connection even with the other sections, with the science sections, with cars. So as you were talking about it, how, cars the science sections are that content, like you were saying, taking that content and applying it to a new scenario, making those connections, et cetera. What people don't realize is that the passage essentially becomes your content. Right. Exactly. Because you're creating, you're given, the content in the moment. And it's about being able to think on the fly and say, okay, now that I have this content, once I have it, which is the author's perspective, which is that conversation with the author, how do I apply it to a new scenario, right? How do I understand it? How do I break down what they gave me? And like you said, it's patient care. I didn't realize this until I started seeing patients my first year in med school. And it was that wasn't actually that different, because they, at HMS, they have like a portion of the year-long kind of preparation for your full clinical year that is about interviewing. So it's the art of interviewing, essentially. And a lot of this comes into play. And I was just like, this is what I teach my students with cars, and it's interesting because I don't think I've talked about this before here, but there are a lot of, I've heard a lot of times the physicians that I've worked with say things like, empathy can't be taught. And there are some things that, are, you have to hope that someone comes in with it. Right. And I think that if you approach cars correctly, you start building that. I think it actually is possible to build those more nuanced, softer, so to speak, skills, because it's about not interrupting the author. I say this all the time, and I still experience this. And right now, my grandma is, she's getting some medical care, and physicians coming in. And so I'm not there in the moment. And so they'll have me on speaker. And so I can hear the conversation. And sometimes I'll join in on the conversation. And the physician will start interrupting. And it's like, what? Stop talking for a moment. Let them finish. Let them share their concerns. So I experience this as a patient. I see it all the time. I work really hard not to do that with my patients. And that's something that's so key that people find it hard to teach, but you're doing that with an author. Right? You're listening to them. You're letting them share what's important to them. And then you're assuming there that they've given you the important information. Medicine takes it a step further and says, okay, now that I have done all of that work, what else do I need? Right. But it really is an opportunity for medical schools to just see how you think. Right. Just truly see, okay, how are you approaching things? How are you, what's your reasoning like? Are you able to adapt to this new scenario? Right? Yeah. Do you have that mental flexibility and that adaptability? And that's what you can cultivate with cars. And so when you learn to shift, okay, this is my patient, right? And I'm going to be able to understand what they say and then think critically. You have the capacity to do better than what it may feel like in the moment. And that applies to the sciences as well, because you can take what you're learning, right? And that same ability to think critically on your feet and that flexibility, that adaptability, and you can take and apply it to the sciences. The two are not, as much as they may feel like totally there's so much there. There's so much that applies to both. Sorry, I'm very passionate. I can keep talking about this for days.
I know. The two of us put together, we could literally talk about this probably for the rest of our lives, especially when we talk about the bridge between science and cars, because I teach science and cars all the time for our course students, for free students, right? I absolutely love it. And I love that you're also sharing, right, the fact that cars, in a way, is useful because it allows medical schools to see your ability to reason, your ability to listen, right? Because to me, one of the most important shifts that you make, if you think about your score, right? Because I'm sure some of you guys are sitting here listening like, okay, sounds good, Molly, sounds good, Azaii, right? I get it. I should love cars, right? But how do I improve my score though, right? To be honest, I think this shift in mindset is probably the most important determinant of your score in cars. Can you take yourself out of the equation and listen and converse without interrupting? Right? That is what they are trying to understand from your car score. So making that mindset shift is huge in your ability to perform well in this section. Obviously, there are lots of other things that we could chat about. We could talk about specific reading strategies. We get a ton of those in our course, right? You'll see some in our free sessions as well. Go hang out with Azaii, right? We could talk about strategy. We could talk about timing skills, all these things. But honestly, you guys, the patience not patience like people, patience like being ready to sit there and engage with the passage, right? And to allow the author to teach you. That I think is the most important determinant of how you're going to perform in cars, right? So if you're here listening for a quick tip to improve your score, change your mindset, right? If you can convince yourself that cars is useful and that it's really not as subjective as it feels to you in this moment, that's a huge step forward. So if you're there listening to this podcast and you're feeling like, okay, you know what, I can kind of start to feel that, round of applause for you, right? Huge step for your cars prep. Azaii, do you agree? Like that's one of the most important things if you want to improve your score.
Oh, 100%, because it's that mindset shift that allows you to develop strategy and to use and apply strategies consistently that allows for that subjectivity to be removed, right? Because if you're fighting cars tooth and nail the entire way, guess what? When you get strategies that could be helpful, by the time you start using them, you've already fought the passage. You're probably fighting the strategies to some extent because you're thinking, okay, well, it's actually subjective, so this isn't going to work every passage. Then you're setting yourself up for more difficulty than you need to. Whereas if you learn to take yourself out of that equation, learn to shift, how you think, you open yourself up to having and to using strategies that allow for that consistent growth. And then the question becomes, right? People are always saying, okay, well, if it were actually so straightforward, if it were actually so easy, if it isn't actually subjective, why am I doing poorly on it? And this is where it's that combination of that and not knowing the strategies, right off the bat. So what can happen is, a lot of times students, when they come to the free trial session that we do of the CARS weekly free trial session, they're shocked when they hear us have this conversation about why CARS matters and also how it applies to the other sections. And then we go through some of the strategies. So we essentially do a preview of the course in the free trial session. If you haven't already been, selfishly, I will ask you to come. I enjoy it.
Amazing.
I love it.
Little plug.
And I think one of my favorite things that happens basically every week is I'll usually get one student that emails me afterwards and says, I just got my perfect score. I just got a 6 out of 6, or I finally understood XYZ. And that's huge. That's huge because usually if students are coming to us, it's because they're struggling with CARS. So for someone to finally break through and say, I just got my first perfect score, that's the kind of thing that we live for, right? That's the kind of thing that keeps me doing this, even when, I've had a long day in the clinic last, especially towards the end of last year, which just got really hectic. And it's like, you live for those moments because you can improve on CARS. You can get to a place where you are doing consistently well. And that's what we want for you. That's honestly all that we want for you with respect to the CARS realm. Yeah. Because we have a lot of aspirations for you. We want you to, we want to help you by the time you find us to not have to retake the exam. If you're already retaking, we don't want you to have to take it again. We want to make sure that you get the score you want, that you get into the med schools that you want. We want to make sure that, you get to be that fantastic physician. And a couple of us also have this, additional joy that we get to make sure you don't make the same mistakes we do. And in that, make it an easier transition to medical school. But with respect to CARS, we want you to be able to do well consistently and get that score on test day.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. You were talking about getting students feedback and I just got my first 6 out of 6. I was immediately had the prickles, oh my God, I'm going to start tearing up. It makes me so happy, honestly, because CARS is so scary and so intimidating for so many people to hear that, learning strategies and accepting this growth mindset, opening yourself up to, engage with other perspectives that are different from you, right? And seeing the results, it's such an important step along your MCAT journey, right? Because a lot of us feel comfortable with science, right? It's familiar to us. CARS is this big mystery, right? And it's so confusing, so subjective. We don't know what we're supposed to do with it, right? And once you start to make a breakthrough in CARS, in my experience and with the experience with a lot of the students that I've worked with, once you start making moves in CARS, it changes your whole perspective of the MCAT, and it facilitates growth in other sections as well, right? And it's not just as simple as throw out your experiences, your mindset, and now you're going to 132. Obviously, there are other things that play into this, but right? It is a lot more straightforward than you think. And honestly, I feel like sometimes the way that we as pre-meds are prepared for cars kind of contributes and perpetuates this fear. Because I don't know about you, Azaii, but personally, when I started, I told you guys, right? I saw cars for the first time while taking a full length and just said, what the heck is going on? Right. I immediately I went to Google, right, into Reddit and said, okay, someone teach me what the heck I'm supposed to do here. Right. And I really didn't find much that was actually helpful, right? I found the Jack Westin Daily Cars passages and I've been doing them ever since. That was helpful, right? As practice material. But at that moment in my life, it was hard for me to find guidance and support with this, right? And that's why it brings me so much peace and joy, right? That we do these free sessions and that we have all this structure we provide in our course, because I know that if I were starting my journey again today, I would have so much more support than I did going in. And that is such a gift as an instructor and as a content creator, right? To know that, our goal is to set you guys up better than we were set up in the past. Because, we need to break this sort of a cycle, right? And ultimately that's what we're here for, right? That's why Azaii and I hop out of bed in the morning. We're like, we're going to go help people succeed in cars. It's a true joy working with all of you guys and hopefully, right, starting to break these negative thought patterns with cars, right? You guys all have the capacity and the ability to succeed. And we hope that you feel that after listening to this too.
Yeah, something that I say in all of my live sessions, there are two things. So if you ever come to a free trial session, you will probably see this before we even get started. And it's that we will always work under the assumption that everyone here, so in this case, listening, but also in the classrooms, in the workshops for course students and office hours and the free trial sessions, is smart and capable of doing well, right? And recognizing, truly believing that a weakness is just a strength we haven't cultivated yet. And it's about progression and not perfection. And it's giving ourselves that room to grow, to make mistakes that allows for just really different outcomes than where we're starting. And I want to echo what you said. Our course is not just throw yourself out there, like throw your opinions out the window, right? It's not that. We do provide a lot of structure. We provide very clear strategies on how to read a passage, on how to approach different questions. We're having, sessions on how to review passages. So all of these things are discussed in detail in the course, and there's so much support. There's for, the students in the course, we have the workshops where you work through passages with an instructor and with other students. We have office hours where you can come and ask questions to our expert cars instructors and they'll answer them for you. For students that are still trying out to see if the course is a good fit, we have the free trial session of the cars, where we go through a passage using some of the more basic Jack Westin strategies. And it's that shift in mindset that allows students to really get into those strategies and apply them well and apply them consistently. And so we encourage you guys, if you haven't already, to try them out, but also to recognize that structure is possible to remove subjectivity, right? Because and I think we were having conversations about this earlier, like it's subjective to the author, right? It's not subjective to you. And so that should really be the only factor that's changing between passages, the author and the content that you're presented with. And so cars can be beautiful. When I first started teaching, I started as a tutor before I became an instructor. And so I taught all sections of the MCAT, and cars, no matter what the student, their background was, everyone needed work on cars and everyone saw improvement in cars, because that's the unique section. And that has the potential to be a breakthrough section. And that's why I'm personally so passionate about it and now focus on cars. And I know you're also really passionate about it, Molly, because it's just, there is room for growth. And if, you don't take anything else away from this, there's room for growth. And we just have to adjust how we think to allow ourselves to take in those strategies and actually grow.
Yeah. I saw so much personal growth when I really started to focus on cars. Because a lot of the science sections, it'll make sure you understand the content. It'll teach you critical thinking. But cars, I think, has the capacity to develop personal skills and interpersonal skills in a really unique way, right? So it's restructuring your mindset. That's so important. That's what we're talking about here today. Once you sort of pop that bubble of, oh my God, I can do well on cars, right? That's when we need extra support. That's why we've got such specific strategies, right? It's like, okay, now I'm not scared. So how can I read this in a way that will help me understand the author, right? We definitely provide lots of that type of support. And I honestly love engaging with our strategies. It helps so much just clarify how you should be reading. So definitely, like, as I said, right, definitely come see us in those. And it's just such a joy. At the very least, you get to learn a ton about the world, right? You're going to hear about, I always say archaeology because I that's one of my favorite passages, Jared Diamond, right? Some of our daily passages, right? Or philosophy or political science or art or history or dance or theater, right? Like, it's always fun just to learn about different things, right? But also being able to break it down and really focus on listening, right? And absorbing important things for other people. It helps in your personal life as well, which is such a gift. And it's one of my favorite sections to learn for that reason. It helps you actually grow as a person, which is absolutely amazing.
I have one last thing I want to say before we go.
Okay.
So there's something really powerful about being able to review how you worked through a passage and learning how you think, learning how you learn. And that's something that the MCAT provides the unique opportunity to do because it's forcing you to step away from how you went through things in undergrad. And CARS does that. CARS forces you to think about how you think when you're reviewing. There's no other way to really assess how things are going and to know where to improve. And so it's something that's unique to the MCAT more often than, undergrad in general, because the way you learn has to change. And with CARS, right, it's really just emphasizing how you think. Take this opportunity and run with it, because the way that you learn in undergrad is different than the way you learn for the MCAT. And the way you learn in undergrad is different from how you'll need to learn in medical school. You cannot, and you should not, cram your way through medical school. Why? Because you're doing this for your patients, right? Yeah, you'll pass that one test that's coming up, but then you're not going to remember it when you need it for your patients, right? And so learning how you think and being able to kind of self-diagnose academically, not medically, is a really unique opportunity. So I just really want to encourage y'all to take advantage of that and to take that kind of self-assessment and that metacognition, thinking about how you think seriously, because it's something that I wish I would have understood while I was studying for the MCAT, and that now knowing how I learn makes a difference. So yeah, I just want to really encourage you guys with that.
Beautiful. Love it. Love it. Love it. Azaii. That's amazing. Yeah. Take Azai's advice. Don't forget, she's in Harvard Medical School. She knows what she's talking about.
Oh, goodness. Oh well, thank y'all for listening. And thank you, Molly, so much for joining us again. Super excited to have you. And go see Molly in free trials. Come see me in free trials, Phil in free trials. We are always excited to see you guys there and in the course as well.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure being here with you, Azaii. And it's a pleasure, hopefully in the future, to interact with you guys, right? Come see us. Like Azaii is saying, we love working with you. And I can't wait for you to embark on this little journey of CARS self-discovery. Have lots of fun, you guys, and definitely come see us if you need some extra support.